Welcome to the Mentor Ministry training, the official kickoff. It feels like it's been forever since we've been trying to get this rolling, so I'm happy to finally be doing this, and what a great turnout. I originally prayed for 10 men, and I think we've got 16 signed up, and then Jim showed up, so that I think makes 17 that we've got total. A couple guys couldn't be with us tonight, and we'll get this to them online. But welcome to the training. This training's for you guys, so I encourage you to challenge me, stop me, ask me questions anywhere along the way. If something pops in your head, somebody else may have the same question and they're scared to ask, so please ask me questions if you have any. So I want to start with a kind of obvious thing, kind of silly thing, but I want to start with the word mentor, all right? One of the 1,000 mysteries of the Bible for me is that God never uses the word mentor in the Bible. No translation has the word mentor in it. Anybody have any thoughts on why that might be?
Different word?
We could interchange it with discipleship, maybe, possibly. I think those are two different types of relationships, and we'll talk about that later.
I think
But
a lot more of it, though, it has to do with culture.
Culture?
In the Jewish culture, mentorship was
implied.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's like a
was almost
standard.
implied.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great point. I do wonder why God didn't include it, and I'll tell you why I think. We can unpack that in a minute. But first, I wanted to just let you marinate on that for a minute and jump into our purpose, our mission statement, why we exist, what we are, how we're going to do it. So this ministry exists to equip and encourage spiritually mature members, us, of the church to be prepared to be matched with those seeking to follow Christ and grow spiritually. So mentees or disciples. The what is we exist to establish one-on-one relationships between two people or a mentor and a couple. I've done that before with married couples, where one encourages the other in spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical growth through seeking Christ. And I put Christian spiritual formation there, and we've got to add the word Christian. There is spiritual formation that isn't Christian, so we want to make sure we keep the Christ in Christmas, right? And how are we going to do it? So we establish a group, which we have, and we'll meet as often as necessary. I'm thinking maybe quarterly. Now, you guys can reach out to me anytime you want. I'm thinking maybe quarterly we'll get together and just debrief, and we can change that as we roll. But we want to remain equipped to mentor, disciple others to grow the kingdom of God one soul at a time. And then we'll provide a directory, and there's a directory somewhere. If you guys all make sure you check yours. I kind of took what you wrote and kind of made it all standardized a little bit. If you don't like it, feel free to line it out, write other stuff in there. Just try to write legibly. Some of them were a little difficult to read. All right, so now that you've thought about this, the word mentor in the Bible. Here's what I thought. This is just my thinking. I have no theological framework for this. I have no evidence to back it up. It's just my 2 cents. And maybe when I kick the bucket, I'll ask Jesus, but that'll probably be the very last question, I think, to ask Jesus. But here's just my thought. All right, Chris, you know the Great Commission, right? You believe that those are Jesus's words to us. You do. You do everything Jesus says to do, right?
Try.
You do your very best. All right, so get up right now and go over to Walmart, make 2 disciples, bring them back here. We already got the baptistry set up. We'll baptize them, and you teach them everything you know. Cool? Does that work?
I'll try.
Yeah, I know you would. But that's not a really effective way to do this, right? And God in His infinite wisdom, I think knew that we needed something better than that. So how about this, guys? What if I take Chris to lunch and I tell him stories. And I tell him about the man with the pornography addiction that wanted to call me at 2 a.m. when he was alone and the urges hit. And that's when I learned to set up ground rules at the very first call we have, the very first meeting we have. Isn't that more effective? Now he has knowledge. He can take that knowledge and use it in a way that God intended him to. And so I think instead of God wanting us to figure us out, He gave us these stories. So Old Testament, and these are in your handouts for you, and I won't go through all these. You guys probably know all of these, but in your handouts, I gave you each of these in a little short summary of what happened in that story. And if you find any references in there that are off, please let me know. But he gave us these stories. He gave us these examples to study and gain that kind of knowledge. Like, hey, Chris, your first meeting with your mentee, you probably need to set up ground rules. Like when you go to bed, please don't call me after 9 o'clock. Shoot me a text. If I happen to be up, maybe I'll call you. But so God gave us these stories. And here's the coolest part about this, guys. I would say probably the majority of congregants that are sitting out here on Sunday can tell you who most of these people are, right? Maybe except for the last ones, but they can probably tell you who, Moses is, right? And so I find that really interesting because I think that God chose these notable figures to teach us, among other things, how to mentor, right? And he didn't stop in the Old Testament. He gave us an equal number in the New Testament. And most people are going to know most of these people. So he used these notable figures to give us these examples to study. And I recommend you guys do. Take them, one at a time, a day at a time, or however, every couple of days. And study all of these because every one of these stories is kind of different and they teach you something about this type of relationship. All right? So I think that's definitely information that we can use in the future to help us. All right, so why do we need another approach? Why do we need another program? Why do we need another ministry, right? Many of you guys in this room have mentored in the past or discipled in the past. Many of you might be mentoring someone or some, couple people now. So why do we need another approach? Why can't we just rely on this organic? And I'll tell you, the organic relationships are the best that just happen. And God does that. I believe He connects spirits specifically for these types of relationships. But why can't we just rely on that? Well, somebody way smarter than me came up with this model of discipleship in these 5 points. And scholars have studied this and studied this and studied this. And I'll tell you, it's one of the only things that's not argued over. Most all discipleship scholars, professors, academics believe you need all 5 of these points to successfully make a disciple and make that disciple a disciple maker, all right? Because that's the end goal, right? And so it works for every type of church, 50 people, 200 people, mega church, 1,000 people. It works for any kind of church, any kind of situation. We can do this if we hit all 5 of these cylinders. But problem is, most churches do an amazing job up to here, and then they leave off the last step, all right? And they leave that last part, that people multiplied, up to just pure chance, all right? And that's kind of what we're talking about with just organically meeting someone. And, and that's okay. You connect with someone, they mention something that makes you think, hey, we should go get a cup of coffee and talk. That's all right. But I think we're missing out on fully executing the model if we don't have a plan for how to do it consistently. So I kind of want to just go through this fairly quickly so you guys understand each one of these cylinders, because it'll make sense as we're driving towards the 5th one. So this is Pastor Will. He has shares no resemblance, no likeness to anyone that we know. He's just a random dude that I picked off the internet. So Pastor Will does what's called platform directed, and that's the $2 seminary word. Write this down, Sam, you'll need to know that, is didactic. So it's one-way teaching. Pastor Will gets up in front of the congregation on Sunday morning and he tells everybody how God says we should live our lives, right? It's awesome. And for us personally, that we don't have Pastor Will, but our Pastor Phil is very good at that, right? No likeness. Sam, you're laughing, but this is a totally just random guy that I just picked. It's not,
Somebody did grab it off the list.
it's not, no.
He's a doppelganger.
Yeah. Yeah. And he's got a nice little megaphone
He
and
has hairs.
he's got a megaphone. He's got his red curly hair, right? So here's the thing though. No matter how great the pastor is, have you ever had a question on Sunday morning? Or Pastor Phil says something, you're like, what do you say? Wait a minute. And I truly believe, I don't know about Pastor Will, but Pastor Phil, if you raise your hand, he's probably going to call on you. It's probably not really great for you to do that because it's going to mess up the flow and other people might look at you funny and visitors, if it's their first time, they may leave, so he would probably answer your question, but that's not really the setting to do it, right? So then we go on to this second step, program driven, and this is our small groups. All right, and this is our men's groups and all the discipleship groups that we do, the seasonal groups and those kinds of things. And that's a really great environment for discipleship. It really, truly is. But here's the problem, and especially with men. Jerry, you lead a class, right? You ever been in a study and you look at a man and you're like, do you have a question? And you might prod him. Do you have a question? You look like maybe you have a question. Do you have a statement? Not me. I'm going to tell you guys the first small group I was in, one of the men in that group spoke Hebrew and Greek and had written more papers than I wrote in seminary just as a lay person. And so I wasn't going to open my mouth for anything because whatever I had to say was stupid compared to what now I learned. And those, I came to love those men and they loved me and I felt comfortable. And then I had a big mouth like I normally do and talk too much. But you ever had that happen? You just know this guy has a question. He's not going to ask it because you don't want to look stupid, right? So again, I'm not taking anything away from those groups. They have their place, but it's still just not good enough. The next step is process-oriented. Those are any processes that the church does. The new members class is a great example of that. Hopefully they learn their spiritual gifts and maybe their purpose, their calling, and they're willing to commit to a long-term, process of becoming a disciple at that point. But what do we do with those people after that class ends, right? Do we just send them out and, I don't want to say go figure it out, but, what do we do? We need to be equipped to help those people when they come out. Hopefully they get involved in a small group and in a relationally nourished group. That's your life group. So you get together, you do life together. We go out to dinner every once in a while. You do life together. It can be more intimate. Actually, I think, Jim, our life group is bigger than our small group. But there's still people in there, in my group at least, that I would be kind of scared to ask a question in front of maybe. Because there's some really smart people in there, including Pastor Phil. So, that's still not a really great place to ask, questions. So that brings us to people multiplied. And I love that we just did the Forge, because Joshua, he says we need to multiply. He didn't say we need to add. Addition is great. We add to the kingdom, that's great. But that's not, I don't think, what the Great Commission was designed for. We want to multiply people. I've told you guys, a lot of you guys before, I call it a holy pyramid scheme. It's like Advocare for Jesus. One guy gets 2 guys, who get 4 guys, who get 8 guys. Now we're multiplying. and we're making disciples who become disciple makers. They make disciples who become disciple makers, and it's this huge pyramid. All right, and so we need that last piece of the model, and we need to be ready. So why should we be ready? I'm gonna get real personal with you guys. I won't rehash my testimony because most of you guys have heard it more than once. But my story is a perfect example of why we need a mentoring program ready to go at a moment's notice. So my journey in 2012, I had a miraculous salvation experience. And I always giggle when Pastor Phil says, Gnosko, you know that you know that you know. There's no question. I either had heat stroke or I was saved. Wondered that there was no question in my mind. I was getting ready to call 911 because I thought for sure I was having a heat stroke. It was actually, I believe, the Holy Spirit coming into my body and giving me peace that I had never felt in my life before. But I was 100% certain on that hot summer day in 2012 that I was saved. The issue for me was I wasn't raised in church, okay? My parents don't even believe in being saved. I guess the book of Ephesians fell out of their Bibles somewhere along the way. They don't even believe in that, all right? So what do? I did the only logical thing that I could think of, which was go to a church. And I go to this church, and they said, we're not equipped to help you. And I really wanted to say, well, what is it that you're equipped to do then? Because you sure did pass the plate earlier, but now I'm asking you to help. And I'm not asking for money. I'm not asking for rent or anything. What I'm asking for is free. All I'm asking for is your time to teach me. And they said, we just can't do that. This was a very large church. If I told you which one it was, you guys would probably be shocked. But but not here in town, but another one similar. So anyway, moving on. So what happened to me? I got embarrassed. I got discouraged. I felt like a fool. I felt like I must have been wrong. Surely I wasn't saved, because why would God save me to leave me hanging and not take me somewhere, right? I went to a church that's logical, isn't it? And so, so this is basically my, journey. I think these dates actually got screwed up, but if the church couldn't help me, there must be no hope. So we'll look at this, and what I really want you to notice is this 5-year gap here, right? From 2012 to 2017, there's this 5-year gap where I had no clue really what to do. So I went, and bought camels and wandered around the desert. I mean, that's what all you guys would do, right? And so for 5 years, that's just wasted time that I could have been in ministry. I could have been helping others. I could have been helping to grow the kingdom. I could have been useful in the kingdom, but it was just wasted time. But then you look at these next 2 years, I take off in a sprint. I go to a church where the church was prepared and a man was prepared the minute I walked in the door to say, come, walk with me. Let's go. Let me show you how to do this. And I ate it up, and it wasn't even a year. I started creating new small groups and leading groups. And I've been posting that forgiveness book, and we'll talk about that later. I led that as a Bible study. And so just in this 2-year period, all these things happened because one man was prepared to walk with me. And so it was really, kind of like a sprint there. So that's why I think we need to be prepared. And, I want you guys to think back to, last year we had that record number of baptisms, right? And I'm sure some of those people got hooked up with other people. A lot of them were Paul Hook's people. And that's another thing I think we need to pair up with him and give him some help, because he can't do it all on his own. So wouldn't it be great for us to come alongside him and give him some help? And then we'll talk about later, there's going to maybe be some opportunity for him to help us as well. But that way, when they come out of the baptistry, we have that directory that's going around. Wouldn't it be awesome to just hand them that? And that's my plan for Sunday, is to go in there and all the men in there, except for Ryan, I'll hand them a sheet and say, here's a list of men that are willing to take you to lunch today and start walking with you right here day one. Because you know the minute they get out of the baptistry, their life is probably going to get much harder, at least spiritually, right? We know that. We have all been there, right? So, how many opportunities did we miss last year to come alongside those folks? How many of those people fell through the cracks? And I don't know that any of them have fallen back in, but we know that people do fall back in, after they're on fire for Christ. They come to church a couple times, they get saved, they get baptized, and then they just go back to life, right? So we got to be ready. We got to talk about growth. How do we grow the church, grow the kingdom? Pastor Phil loves to talk about this. I think this is a 10-mile radius, but there's like 217 churches, I think, in that radius. But internally, our church, we average, about 400 in worship. Only half of those come through the week to small groups. That's 50%. So that's not a super great number, I don't think. And I don't think the church is doing anything wrong, but that brings up the question, like, what do we do? What do we do about that? How do we get the other 200 people somehow involved and encouraged, to come? If those other 200 people that are only coming on Sunday, if they had a one-on-one relationship with someone that was holding them accountable, how many more you think would come through the week?
Not only that, but how many more people would be out there growing the kingdom? The fact that
Yeah.
the more people they met, the more people they talked to.
Yes. Right. Multiplication. And that leads to the external, because the more people we develop into disciple makers, the more we can chip away at the world outside. But guys, we can only accomplish that through relationships. You guys know that, right? We have to have relationships with people. If visitors come in and not, and I read a study one time where they said it takes like 3 people greeting a visitor to make them actually want to come back.
Do you realize how many people actually greet
Oh, yeah.
visitors?
Oh, yeah. We do a great job of that. I'm not saying that. I'm just telling you what.
I'm just.
But
Do you realize the difference between the church here and
yeah.
200 churches?
Moving on. So, and outside the church only, and this is all Bradley County information, 71,000 adults and, roughly 200 churches, and roughly 56% report regular attendance. If they come visit here and we build a relationship with these people and we hold them accountable, you guys, I don't know, you guys feel like me. I want to come. These last 2 years have been hard for me because I've missed my men's group. I've missed my life group. I've missed coming to those things. My wife said, we're going back, right? Now you're out. And I'm like, yes, whenever it kicks back up. Of course, I graduated right in between the classes. But so I believe that we really can impact this growth by building these relationships. All right, so this is what y'all came here for. So what do these relationships look like? So number one is a mentor relationship. That is growth through friendship. There's no goal other than to get better at walking with Christ daily. It's a friend to confide in and discuss life with. And there's really no other goal than this. Everybody in here can do that, right? Now, there's some things that the mentor has to do. So we talked about setting ground rules, do's and don'ts. Do text me after 9 p.m. Please don't call me after 9 p.m. unless it's an actual emergency, or something. And you can, figure that out, whatever you're comfortable with, not comfortable with. We need to set up how we will meet. So, because of my work schedule, I prefer to do it by telephone. It's very difficult for me to go take time. I don't even eat lunch most days. It's very difficult for me to go take time to sit down with someone. So I prefer to do it by telephone. Been doing it for years. It works great that way. I know one man in my online group that he does it virtually through Teams, and he loves it, and people love it, and he can be anywhere. He travels a lot. He's on the road a lot. When will you meet? Tuesdays at 5 o'clock. That's why I had you guys put availability on there. That helps us kind of line up, mentees. Where will you meet? So if you're going to meet, for coffee, where? How often will you meet? I recommend once a week up front. And then after that, you could do, bi-monthly, like Ken and I. We'll usually talk every other week now. I don't really need, to talk to him every week. Or we might talk for 30 minutes instead of an hour, if I don't have a lot to talk about. And then pretty simple structure, guys. Pray. So that's maybe 5 minutes. And then the majority of these people that are going to sign up for a mentor, or they're dealing with some kind of crisis, conflict, divorce, loss of job, illness, whatever it is. So you let them talk for the majority of the time, 30 minutes. You just let them vent, get it out, whatever they want to talk about. But you're working during that 30 minutes. So I recommend having your YouVersion Bible app open. Great search. I don't like the changes that they made. You got to make sure you click on Bible so you don't end up on some page out somewhere where you didn't mean to go. But listen for keywords. We talked about today, Randy brought up bitterness, and that triggered me to bring up forgiveness. And I said in the group today, I would say that 99% of men deal with unforgiveness. We're told, suck it up, don't cry, no feelings, be a man. And so what do you do with all that hurt? Well, you bottle it up. And Ephesians 2 talks about it. Bitterness turns to wrath, turns to clamor, turns to slander. We're supposed to put all that stuff away from us, but nobody ever taught us how to do that. Suck it up, go be a man. And so that unforgiveness builds over time, and you just keep piling it up, and eventually you get angry. And then you get told, why are you so angry? Well, because I've been sucking it up for 20 years, So you listen for those keywords, you plug them in, and between that and the Holy Spirit, and it's amazing, sometimes I'll go to that, and then the Holy Spirit will say, no, go here, and you just point them to Christ. Right here, I want to say no advice, no worldly advice. We're not there to give them advice. What do you think I should do? Let's see what Jesus would do. Point them back to the Bible, because you're trying to build them, their reliance on Christ, right? And you got to be careful too. I mentored a man that mentored another man who gave advice all the time because he thought he was super smart, which he kind of was. But it became a dependent relationship where this man had to ask him, can I go to the bathroom now? I mean, not that, I'm not exaggerating, obviously, but it became a dependence. That's the wrong dependence. So I said there's really no goal. There's two kind of milestones that we want to hit. One, we want to develop the skills in them that we have learned to cope with stress and anger and loss and whatever it is. And that's to turn to Christ. The other goal that we want to get to at some point, and you as the mentor judge and gauge when you do that. We saw it in the Forge. So Joshua said 2 years, right? Or the other guy said it, every 2 years he has a new disciple, right?
That was his uncle. That was his uncle.
Right. So I was thinking it was the Kendrick brother dude that's in all the movies. But yeah, you're right. It was his uncle. He said every 2 years. So 6 months, a year and a half, 2 years, whatever you guys feel, you got to start pushing them. Hey, is there anybody that you're thinking about that you can do this with? Because the idea is not to be with this person forever. It could go on for a lifetime. It really could. But the idea is to make them a disciple maker. Get them out of their conflict, get them to learn to turn to Christ, which then they can teach others to point other people to Christ. And then you don't have to turn them loose. You could still mentor them, but they need to be mentoring someone else. That's the only way that this is going to work. Yeah, it's the only way it's going to work. And again, mentor, you guys judge when you feel that's okay. Some guys I felt were kind of like me in the beginning. They were on fire and everything. I'm like, let's strike while the iron's hot. Other people I've mentored a year. Some people I never really approached that with because they just declined, kind of in their walk. And that happens sometimes, guys, and you can't take that personally. The second one is discipleship, all right? And that's a specific relationship that focuses on the growth of the disciple's personal relationship with Jesus Christ. So the same as with mentoring, we want to start with some ground rules, some do's and don'ts. But the difference is here is you need to evaluate their walk. Where are they now? What do they know? What do they don't know? How are their spiritual disciplines? How many times a day are they praying? Is it just in the morning? Is it just at night? Are they praying multiple times? Are they keeping prayer lists, which I do a horrible job of doing, but my wife does real good, so it works out because I just ask for her list. Are they reading their Bible every day? Those kinds of things. And so you've got to gauge that, and then you've got to develop a plan for growth. Don't freak out about that. There are 40,000 books on discipleship on Amazon. I haven't vetted all of those. I don't think any of them are out there to intentionally harm anything. I don't know that some of them help. I didn't put it in the suggested reading, but there's a great book that's Steve Gladden. It's about, it's called Discipleship Is, and it's about the Saddleback Church. And they have like 3,400 small groups. That's insane. And they have the same story that Pastor Phil has. It's like 7 guys in a basement. And now they have 3,400 small groups. That's insane to me how you, and he's the Steve Gladden, he's the small group coordinator, yeah. And that's a great book. It's kind of a boring read. Maybe that's why I didn't put it on the list. But it actually talks about the development plan, the discipleship plan, and how you gauge it and how you do it and step by step, how they do it. They have an assessment. You can actually go to their website and pull down the assessment and use that. But you want to develop a plan for growth. Make your own plan. Go verse by verse through the Gospels. When I've done these before, I just started in Matthew. I don't know why I chose that, but it just seems like a good place to start. And just go through the Gospels and start there and kind of see how they take to it. I want to give you guys the resources. You don't have to write this down. I put the last page in your handout has the bibliography for all these books. Together We Equip, Discipleship That Fits. I would 100% read those books. I actually had Dr. Dean and Dr. Stewart, not so much Dr. Dean, but Dr. Stewart was my favorite professor in seminary. And that's an amazing book. And it's not just 100% about discipleship, but it's all the things that come together that make discipleship. Strategic disciple making is a little bit boring. Simple Discipleship is an awesome book too. Not my favorite, but it's funny when we go to these conferences and stuff, like Man Church, they'll have those quotes up there. A lot of those come from this book. And then I am part of CBMC, Christian Businessmen Connection, and I have access to Operation Timothy. I haven't gone through it in a really long time. I'm sure they change it every year or so. So I haven't vetted it lately, but I have access to it. We can just print it out. And so if any of you guys are interested in doing that, and maybe somebody tries it out, and maybe we end up doing it as a discipleship seasonal group or something. But Operation Timothy, a lot of people would tell you, is the gold standard when it comes to discipleship. And then the last one there, that's my favorite book of all time. I actually know David Lawson. His daughter went to my old church in Ottawa. And for those of you guys that didn't see the story that I put in the men's chat this morning, it was a cool story. I worked with my mentor for a year, and he says, you have an issue with forgiveness. I'm like, great, let's fix it. And he's like, okay, not that easy. We'll start working on it. The very next Sunday, David's daughter, Jessie, comes up and says, God told me to give you this book. And I'm like, that's totally random. And I look at it, and it's forgiveness. And I went home and I read the entire thing that right then. And it's great. You can do this. It's set up to be really quick. I think it's supposed to be 40 minutes a day, so it works out to be 6 weeks. I've done it in 6 weeks. I've done it in 10 weeks before with men's groups. But every man should get this book. Every young man in the youth, and they get out of youth, they go through the college and everything, they should have to do this before they get married. I guarantee you it will save them a ton of fights if they'll just read this book, because you end up putting a lot of that stuff on your wife that you carried into that relationship that you didn't even know was a thing, right? Yeah. So I can't say enough about that book. I read it a couple of times a year. Mainly the story of Joseph, which is an amazing story of forgiveness, right? And he didn't really have to work to forgive him. He just kind of did. So anyway, I can't say enough good things about it. All right. So number 3, this is kind of an oddball. This is way out in left field, but there is a relationship, a coach. It's called leadership coaching. This is a very specific type of relationship. You work with a client, typically in business. All right. You have to be trained and certified. I wouldn't go out and try to do this on your own because it deals with contracts. All right. So it requires specific training. I can do it. I can go through it with you, and I'm authorized to certify you. But this book and the study goes through how to deal with contracts. I've done this twice, did a startup, and I did a new business. It's basically businessmen out in the marketplace that want to take their Christian values and bring it into their business. And how do they do that? Because if you guys know, that's not real easy to do nowadays, is it? Right? And if you want to get customers, and you wear out your church very quickly trying to sell things to your church, they'll get tired of you. So if you want to get customers, you have to be very careful how you do it. But this deals with contracts. Both of those things, I had to sign an NDA, and then they had a contract, and then I had a contract, and we had to follow the contract. It was a specific time. But it was awesome. It was an awesome experience. I was happy to do it. But nobody should try to do that without that training. But again, I can do it. I'm certified to do it, so I'm happy to do that with you guys. And you get a cool little certificate. All right. So the main thing, the last part of the Great Commission is what? Teach them everything I commanded them. So go teach them what I taught you, what you have learned, right? So how do we do that? Where do we start? How do we go about doing that? Maybe teaching isn't your spiritual gift. That's okay. Teaching is a skill. This is like math. You can learn how to do math. You can learn how to teach somebody. I highly recommend this book if you want to learn more. It's a very easy read. Some of you book nerds could probably get through it in a day or two. But it's very simple, and it's designed to be very simple. But it's Teach Like Jesus. And what it does is it breaks down the model that Jesus used to teach the disciples. All right, and I'm not going to hit all of these for the sake of time, but I did want to go through a couple of them. So tell lots of stories. Jesus told lots of stories. All right. You have a ton of stories from your lives. You have successes, which is great, but you also have failures, which is even better because you learn something. You don't always learn something through a success, right? But you typically learn something through a failure. So tell lots of stories. Ask lots of questions. The best thing you can do in your relationship with a disciple or a mentee is to love them. And the best way to love them is to get to know them, okay? And you ask lots of questions. Jesus asked a lot of questions, right? Hands-on. Jesus took them and showed them. He said, follow me while I go do this ministry. So it's hands-on, and he led by example. And then you've got to cut the ties, cut the leash, however you want to say it at some point, and send them out to do it themselves. So, maybe you take them, to the Greenway ministry and show them, some evangelism there, and then you send them out to do something like that themselves. But you just bring them along. So again, those are just some examples. If we're going to teach, we should probably model our teaching after the greatest teacher that ever lived, don't you think? I'll just hit this really quick. If you haven't read Rick Warren's Purpose Driven Life, it's a really good book. He's got this, he calls this the discipleship diamond, and I like that. There's 1,000 of these out there, but I like this one. And so we basically we want to just take the Great Commission, because those are our instructions, and kind of work this model. So kind of starts, we evangelize, we bring in somebody, they know Christ, within 30 days, hopefully we have them regularly attending church. Hopefully we have them regularly attending groups. So then they're going to grow in Christ. They grow in their discipleship. And then hopefully they start serving. We get them on a team, get them on security or hospitality or whatever it is. And then they begin serving. So now they're in ministry. And then within a year, we want them making disciples, sharing Christ on their own. And then that goes, round and round and round. All right, so that's pretty much all the good stuff. Now let's talk about the bad stuff. So I call this the 3 A's because it's just easy to remember. I think somebody smarter than me told me that at one point. But so addiction. Addiction is an incredibly difficult thing to mentor through. 9 times out of 10, it takes specialized training. All right. This is where I think we can utilize Paul Hook, because he has that training and he understands it. And I've done a couple of mentoring relationships with addiction. It's really hard. It's really difficult. Most of the time, they're going to fail. A lot of times, they're going to blame you for their failure because you're the mentor. Why didn't you stop me from using drugs or whatever it is? So we want to be real cautious with that one. Adultery, which sounds weird, but adultery is very, very burdensome for the mentor. 2 things. 1, you can't talk about it. Confidentiality is key with your mentees, with your disciples. Whatever they tell you, you cannot tell your wife. I mentored a man that had an affair with a woman in the church, and both families refused to leave the church. You want to talk about awkward. And everybody knew I was mentoring this man. Well, that man's wife was in my wife's ladies group, and she was very transparent with those women, right? Yeah, and so I almost made a bad joke, but moving on. So she was very transparent. She liked to talk. And think about if she was talking and my wife made a face. She would instantly know that I told her something, right? And then I even got to a point where I was mentoring both of them towards the end. So you can't talk to your wife. Pastor Phil talks about that. We'll talk about who you can talk to later. So that's really hard because you keep a lot of that stuff in. But here's the other thing that you might not think about. 9 times out of 10, it doesn't end the way they want it to end. Because most guys are going to come, what do you want to do? What's your problem? I want to save my marriage. And we've talked about this before. You got one person that wants to save the marriage, one person who really doesn't. Whether it's adultery or it could be financial, it could be anything. But usually when you have that imbalance, one person's all in, the other person's all out. It's very rare. Go ahead.
Also depends if they're giving you lip service.
This is true. This is true. They could be telling you what they think you want to hear.
I had a gentleman saying he wanted to save his marriage, but then he was showing me this picture of the girl. He said, well, you gotta talk to somebody. I'm thinking, yeah, mixed signals here.
Mm-hmm. So it doesn't end well, and then they have to blame somebody.
Which is you.
They're not going to blame themselves. That's probably what got them, that attitude got them in that situation to begin with, most likely. So they're going to blame you. I had a horrible situation like that where the guy blamed me, and I'm like, she was giving you a chance and you cheated on her again. So I didn't tell you to go cheat on her because I don't give worldly advice. So pretty sure it's your fault. And that usually destroys the relationship. Abuse. We 100% cannot deal with abuse. Okay? So if you're working with someone, they admit to being abused, they admit to abusing someone else, they threaten to hurt themselves or someone else, you immediately have to report that to Pastor Rusty. And I was thinking maybe, like Walmart has those union cards where somebody talks about a union, you're supposed to go to your car, it's a little laminated card, and you go to your car and you call it, say, enter number. I was thinking about maybe we need something like that. But, just give it to Pastor Rusty. Let him deal with it. You okay, Rob?
Yeah.
All right. That needs to get reported right away. So kind of working back to this burdensome, what do you do? Very simple. You need a mentor. I have a mentor. Every one of you guys needs a mentor, period. You can't go out and have a mentee and say, oh, you need a mentor, and you don't have a mentor. But the other thing is, that's who you confide in, right? So I talk to Ken every week, and that's who I talk to about my mentee, and I don't talk to you guys about it, right? Because all of you guys know this person. So I'm not going to talk to you guys about what's going on. So I go talk to Ken about it. And Ken doesn't really talk to anybody, so it works out well in that situation. But you got to have a mentor. You got to have someone you can talk to that they also have that same level of confidentiality that we have, that'll keep their mouth shut, but also let you vent and unload. So be thinking about that. Be praying about it. Again, it's okay if it happens organically. That's awesome. I honestly, truly believe that God purposely connects certain spirits to serve His purpose. I know that to be true. And I believe that He connects people, especially men, for mentoring relationships, because I've seen men and you're like, I would have chose you two guys to be together and you didn't run in any of the same circles. And that God made that happen because those two men, and that's why we did like our hobbies, our interests, and all that kind of stuff in the directory. Because we want somebody that's doing the same kinds of things that you're doing, right? So you have common interests and things. But you need someone to confide in. You need someone to share the burdens with, and there will be a lot.